morning and welcome to the online service of the Unitarian Universalist Congregation of the Swannanoa Valley for Sunday, February 7th. My name is Spence Foscue and I'm a member of the Board of Trustees. We thank you for joining us in these trying times and look forward to meeting in person when we can safely. It's a blessing each of us was born. It matters what we do with our lives. What each of us knows about the divine is a piece of the truth. We don't have to think alike to love alike, and we don't have to do this alone. Well, Abraham Lincoln's birthday is coming up on February 12th, and our 16th president has had quite a few memorable quotes, but this is my favorite one. It is better to be silent and thought a fool than to speak and remove all doubt. If you're interested in learning more about Unitarian Universalism or our congregation, please see our website, uusb.org. We also invite everyone to join us for coffee hour on Zoom after the service so that we can get to know you better. Instructions are on our website and here following the service. So let our service begin.
The chalice lighting. We gather this hour as people of faith with joys and sorrows, gifts and needs. We light this beacon of hope, sign of our quest for truth and meaning in celebration of the life we share together.
We are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied to a single garment of destiny. Injustice anywhere is a threat to justice everywhere. There are some things in our social system to which all of us ought to be maladjusted. Hatred and bitterness can never cure the disease of fear. Only love can do that. We must evolve, for all human conflict, a method which rejects revenge, aggregation, and retaliation. The foundation of such a method is love. Before it is too late, we must narrow the gaping chasm between our proclamations of peace and our lowly deeds which precipitate and perpetuate war. One day, we must come to see that peace is not merely a distant goal that we seek, but a means by which we arrive at that goal. We must pursue peaceful ends through peaceful means. We shall hew out of a mountain of despair a stone of hope.
This is hymn number 318, We Would Be One.
This is the time when we share our joyful events and those of concern as members of this extended Universalist Unitarian family. So as you wish, please let us all share in them. But first, I would like to take a point of personal privilege. You may be wondering about my black eye. 2 weeks ago, I had cataract surgery in my right eye. 1 week after that, I was on a walk in the Greenway and tripped and hit my eyebrow, that same eye, right here. There's still a knot. And at first, my eyes, I looked like a raccoon. It was totally black and purple. It's beginning to go down. It doesn't hurt, but it was kind of embarrassing, and it was certainly a close call because of the surgery I just had. Now, if you wish to share a joy and concern, please do so and let us all share in them.
Hi, this is Larry Perlman, and I just have a joy to share with everybody. Our friend Jessica Thomas, who was at Mission Hospital for a while, came home today, today being Friday, and she is thrilled to be back home. So she wanted to let everybody know, and I think you might see her at coffee hour today.
Mountain pancakes. We remembered you again this morning, Dad, when we sat down to eat our mountain pancakes. Smothered with just a touch of butter, and of course, plenty of peanut butter beneath the real maple syrup. You so enjoyed these the last time we prepared them at the inn, along with the bacon you like it. Crispy, yet chewy as well. Pancakes were a family favorite long before we served them at our guest at the inn. Peanut butter optional for our guests, but mandatory for us boys at home. It will put hair on your chest, you told us. We giggled, trying to imagine that someday. Now no longer at the end, it's just our family again, and the peanut butter has long since done its trick.
Hi, my name is Anna Marcel de Hermanis, and my joy this week was that the Martin Luther King Scholarship Fund event was yesterday, and I felt like it really went well. There were a few technical glitches, but all in all, I thought having a virtual event this year was challenging, but ended up very nicely. And also, it was part of my joy that I also was a part of the auction committee that was able to raise $1,600 that went to the scholarship fund this year. So to all of you who were in any way a part of that, which is probably most of you, thank you. And let's keep on doing the work, as David Lamont said. Got a lot of work to do. Okay, thanks.
For those of you who did not wish to share your joys and concerns, we hold you in our hearts. For our meditation this morning, the words of the artist Judy Chicago. And then all that has divided us will emerge. And then compassion will be wedded to power. And then softness will come to a world that is harsh and unkind. And then both men and women will be gentle. And then both women and men will be strong. And then no person will be subject to another's will. And then all will be rich and free and varied. And then the greed of some will give way to the needs of many. And then all will share equally in the earth's abundance. And then all will care for the sick and the weak and the old. And then all will nourish the young. And then all will cherish life's creatures. And then all will live in harmony with each other and the earth. And then everywhere will be called Eden once again. And now, in the words of our beloved Reverend Michael Carter, while we are of one mind, I leave you with the eloquence of silence. This is the time when we ask you to share with us your generosity. As you know, your contributions to this congregation are put to good use in our community, especially during this pandemic. In the words of Edward Hale, "I am only one, but I am still one. I cannot do everything, but still I can do something. And because I cannot do everything, I will not refuse to do the something that I can do."
This is hymn number 147, When All the Peoples of This Earth.
Some of you may have heard our distinguished speaker yesterday when she addressed the annual Martin Luther King Jr. prayer breakfast here in Black Mountain, Dr. Oralene Anderson Graves Simmons. And she was also the guest speaker, as you know, about a year ago at our congregation. Dr. Simmons is an internationally recognized lifetime civil rights leader. She's the visionary founder of Asheville's annual Martin Luther King Jr. prayer breakfast, and she is the distinguished recipient of the National MLK Commission's Making of the King Holiday Award that was presented to her by Mrs. Coretta Scott King. Dr. Simmons speaks and teaches widely, inspiring audiences locally, nationally, and around the world about her journey in civil rights along a path of nonviolence in the tradition of Dr. King. We are truly honored to welcome her again to our pulpit.
Unity of purpose is within our reach. Good morning. 1 year ago, almost to the day, I spoke from this pulpit on the day set aside to honor the memory of my hero, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. You heard then the story of my childhood in Madison County, attending the segregated color school at Long Ridge, the Black community in Mars Hill, and later the segregation and oh so wonderful my Stevens Lee High School in Asheville. I believe I mentioned ASCORA, our student civil rights group that included Black students from Stevens Lee and white students from Lee Edwards, the high school for whites in Asheville. I shared with you how in 1961, I was admitted to the all-white Mars Hill College, which always dominated the town of Mars Hill when I was growing up. It was not easy being the first African American, the first non-white, the first colored person to break that racial barrier 60 years ago. I spoke to you about my hopes and dreams and my fears. And I spoke of how some of the expectations and excitement I brought with me as a young woman were battered and shattered and yet not destroyed. For you cannot destroy a person's dream, no matter how deeply racism might be embedded in another person's heart. There's a reason for that. A reason that Dr. King helped make clear in his words and his teachings throughout his life. The reason is that all those negative attitudes, racial biases, racial hatred, white supremacy, racism, are lodged in their hearts. And if love and dreams and hopes are what is lodged in your heart, they cannot be touched. Dr. King taught us something more as well. That while they cannot reach into your heart with evil, you can reach into theirs with love. But I'm getting a little ahead of myself. What I first want to address this morning is what went on in my heart and my mind as a child and how it has guided my life. What went on in my heart and my mind was curiosity about the world beyond me, beyond my home, my family, and all the other limits on the life of a little country girl way back then. Curiosity about other people and how I fit into the world and why it was that way. I was curious, although I didn't know it at the time, about how I could make the world fit me instead of the other way around. Now, don't get me wrong. I didn't set out to change the world when I was still a schoolgirl. What I think I set out to do was simply to learn how I could make the world that I was in more comfortable and more accommodating to me. Beginning at home, then a larger world in Asheville and Marsville College, and finally, as a grown young woman making decisions for herself, how I could make a world that would accommodate the me that I knew was inside that little girl. Because even if I was different from a lot of the people around me, that didn't mean there shouldn't be room for me. Now, where did it start? My house sat down between two mountains, not another house in sight. The road had been cleared between the cornfield and the woods, and the water rushed down the creek and puddled in the spring. I lived there with my grandmother and my uncle. I would climb halfway up the hill and sit on the roots of the big oak tree. This was my seat in my quiet space. I would sit on my seat and pour my thoughts and feelings into this book that I called my journey, not journal, my journey. Dear self, I would write, as I had so many times before. Sometimes my thoughts were happy ones, and I would laugh so loud that my echo would bounce back at me. When I grew older, I thought that I was in love and wrote love poems. Other times my thoughts were filled with sadness and fear, and my eyes would fill with tears. Tears that would fall on my book so that the pages would curl up on the ends. I would fold my arms around my book, knowing that when I reached the bottom of the hill and was home again, I would be a different person. But since I always stopped at the middle of the hill, I wondered what was on the other side of the mountain. My Uncle Kelly was a hunter and often roamed the hills and the mountains. I said, "Uncle K, what's on the other side of the mountain?" "Same thing that's on this side of the mountain." "No, really, what's on the other side of the mountain?" "Same thing that's on this side of the mountain is on the other side of the mountain," he said again. In disbelief, I took my journey book and walked up the big hill, past my sitting spot, all the way up to the top of the mountain. I took a deep breath and looked over the mountain. There between the mountains sat a little house that looked like our house. It was just the same. I took another look back at our house and walked back down the hill. I stopped at my sitting spot and wrote, "The same thing that's on this side of the mountain is on the other side of the mountain." And somehow that set me thinking, is it really all the same everywhere? Over the years, as I grew older, I saw over and over that other people did not share my perspective of the me that I felt inside. At first, I saw a little country girl, not sophisticated and cityfied enough for Asheville. Then they saw a pushy colored girl. How dare that Negro aspire to attend an all-white college like Mars Hill? Later on, they saw a nobody who didn't deserve a job or an apartment that were reserved for white folks. And all that time, what I saw in myself was me, a child full of questions, a young lady with self-respect and dignity, a young woman with potential. I saw a leader, but that's not what they saw. And oh, how long it took me to convince myself that I didn't have to change me to fit their idea of who I was. How long it took to believe that they were going to have to change their perspectives to fit the reality of who I was. It began early on, as I explained before. For an example, one day my grandmother took me to the college's amphitheater to see a stage production on a special Founders Day. I watched a student, a white student actor, of course, in paper chains and his face painted black, being led off the stage by another actor. I was full of questions for my grandmother when we arrived home that evening. She told me that the actor with the face painted black was portraying my great-great-grandfather going to prison. I learned that he was a former slave. And I asked in my innocence, was he going to prison because he didn't wash his face? Were his paper chains his decorations? Later, of course, I learned the story of Joe Anderson, in prison as collateral for a construction loan owed by the college. But even then, it struck me as strange, peculiar, just plain old wrong. Yet everybody else seemed to take it as perfectly normal. Another time, I was attending school in Asheville, riding that bus that would take us on the 45-mile round trip to Asheville. I was excited about going to a big new school. I wanted to make new friends and study hard. Because what I saw in me was that girl full of curiosity about this new, larger world of Asheville, and students from the big city, and all the classes that I could take. But what they saw was a new girl. They saw someone that they didn't want to play with because I looked like a white girl and talked funny. And it wasn't just the other girls at the school. I saw an eager student, but my teacher saw something else. She told me that I was fast, walking with my head up in the air and switching when I walked, and that I should sit alone in the cafeteria away from my classmates. She had no way of knowing that I have a spinal condition that tilts my head up, and one leg is a fraction of an inch shorter than the other one, causing a shifting in my walk. All she saw was somebody different who didn't belong. And over time, I learned that no matter what I saw inside, no matter who I thought I was, who I knew I was inside, I learned that humility comes along with self-esteem. The humility meant that I would have to just let them think what they will, but self-esteem would make sure that I would do what I will. You see, I also learned that I might not be able to change the whole world, but I could certainly learn to be the very best me in the world. A few minutes ago, I told you that I was getting ahead of myself. Well, now, I've caught up with that moment. I said that Dr. King taught us an important lesson, that while others cannot truly penetrate your heart with their evil thoughts, you can reach into theirs with love. That was how the Martin Luther King prayer breakfast began in Asheville in 1982. Once we had our approval from my supervisor, Leslie Anderson, to hold the breakfast at the Montford Center, the question arose about who would be invited. Would it be just Black folks, friends and neighbors and leaders in the Black community? Or would it be open to everyone? We chose to invite anyone who was interested. White, Black, Jewish, Christian, Montford neighbors, folks from West Asheville, or Biltmore Forest. If they were interested, they were welcome. We wanted to reach out into the whole community with the love of Dr. King. We wanted to celebrate his life and, more importantly, share his message and continue his work. After all, the Black community had been hearing his message and sharing his lessons for many, many years. It was, to tell the truth, white people in the South who needed to learn from Dr. King and understand his vision of a different world. And of course, Dr. King himself drew on Black leaders who had preceded him on. A. Philip Randolph and Frederick Douglass, and Sojourner Truth and Booker T. Washington, and so many others. and he was the disciple of a man from India, Mahatma Gandhi, who preached nonviolent protests, and a follower of Jesus, a Jewish carpenter from the Middle East, and a student of other prophets and philosophers, black and white, from around the world and across the centuries. How could we, Phyllis Sherrill, Gladys Farney, and myself, do anything other than invite all of Asheville to attend? So instead of just sending a circular to the black churches and community groups, we advertised it in the newspaper to let everybody know about it. And so many different people came from so many walks of life. And that truth that I had sensed in myself as a young girl began to take shape more clearly. How different we all are if we allow ourselves to be, and how alike we are. All these different people can come together and celebrate our differences as long as we are unified in our purpose. We can see each other as equals and as equal participants in a great cause. If only we work toward our goals with love and do not allow ourselves to be infected by the virus of isms, and the bacteria of phobia, racism, sexism, ageism, anti-Semitism, homophobia. There are so many others in this world that if we allow ourselves to be infected, we will be others. Because we are all different, every one of us, in this way or that. And everything that makes you different from me and your neighbors different from you is what makes all of us the same, individual members of the human race. And yet there was still a question that arose every time I visited Mars Hill College, now Mars Hill University, the Founders Day. Who gets to sit at the Founders table? In 1999, the former slave Joe Anderson was honored by Mars Hill College. Joe was owned by Jesse Woodson Anderson, a member of the school's board of trustees. He and Joe had the same last name because many slaves were given the names of the families that owned them. History books and archival documents told the story of how the board of trustees had underestimated the construction cost of the building. And when the contractor came to collect the final payment of $1,000, they found themselves embarrassed. The treasury was empty. So Joe was put in jail as collateral until the loan was paid off. If the founders had not come up with the money, he would have been sold off, sold down the river, as the old phrase went, probably to labor on a plantation in the deep South. But they did find the money. Joe was returned to the Anderson family and resumed his work as a master brickmaker. Our family, the black descendants of Joe, was recognized and celebrated as a founding family of the university. So I had attended the Founders Day banquet year after year, where we sat at separate tables, always looking for the other Anderson table, the Jesse Woodson Anderson table. Years passed of hoping and looking. Then a telephone call came. It was from a lady in Hawaii. She asked me if I knew a Jesse Woodson Anderson. I answered, Yes, what about him? Thinking it was another reporter looking for a story or a student writing a paper. She just straight up said, "My name is Susie Anderson, and my great-great-grandfather, Jesse Anderson, was your great-great-grandfather, Joe's slave owner." I said, "Repeat that, please." She said, "Please don't hang up. I've been on a national search for you. I hope my grandpa was not a mean man to your grandpa." I caught onto the sink to steady myself. My tears were falling onto the floor as I searched for something to say. I told her that Jesse lost much of his possessions after the Civil War. He became a minister and gave Joe and his family property to live on. Jesse took an apartment in Asheville. Their friendship was priceless as Joe traveled by horseback to Asheville and cared for Jesse until his death. Susie came forth with words of apologies for the indignities that my family had suffered because of slavery and segregation, adding, "Please forgive us." And we promised to stay in touch with each other. I hung up the phone and more tears came. I cried all the emotions that had been pinned up inside of me for all those years. I wanted someone from the Jesse Woodson Anderson family to say those words. I wanted someone to say, "I am sorry. Please forgive us." I poured all of my thoughts into my journey, and the tears continued to fall, and they curled up the pages. All those years, I had attended the college's founders banquet, always looking for someone from the other Anderson family. I wanted to sit down at their table, just to sit across from them. I didn't know what I would say, but I wanted to have that conversation. Susie and I became friends through our letters, emails, and telephone conversations. She decided to visit me in North Carolina, and we researched our history together. We found stories that made us laugh and stories that made us cry. We put together files and documents and placed names on our family trees. Our trees grew. The branches started overlapping and crossing. Susie screamed with excitement, "We are cousins. I knew it, we are cousins. You are my little cousin." And we both screamed together as he placed a kiss on my cheek. I finally had someone to go with me to the college's Founders Day banquet. We walked together, hand in hand, sat at the same table. The descendant of the slave owner and the descendant of the former slave. A relationship that brought that unity that I had never dreamed would be possible. We continue our relationship today, each realizing that there are so many questions of why and how as we continue to research together. Our bond continues to bring us closer as that unity of one Anderson. I amended my birth certificate and added the name Anderson. I am now Oralene Anderson Graves Simmons. This was truly unity in diversity. Susie Anderson, great-granddaughter of the slave owner, and Oralene Anderson, great-granddaughter of the slave he owned, found a unity in our lives through our common past. We found that as different as we are, as different as our lives have been, as different as Hawaii is from North Carolina, we share a common goal to find and celebrate our common humanity. I recently learned through Ancestry.com that I share a common ancestor with another longtime friend, Mr. David King, formerly a Buncombe County Commissioner and a member of the Martin Luther King Association Board of Directors. And I have a great-great-grandmother in common. We are third or fourth cousins. And when I see the viral of divisiveness in this larger world, that world I dreamed of as a little girl, I also see the same possibility of unity. The real virus, the pandemic coronavirus, does not care if you are black or white, if you are the descendants of a slave or the great-great-grandchild of a president. It affects us all. All human beings share a susceptibility to that virus, just as we share our resilience on clean water to drink and clean air to breathe. We share so much. If we only have the willingness, the humility, and the self-esteem to look at what we have in common instead of what divides us. If we turn away the evil that comes toward us and repay it with love, as Dr. King told us we must. If we love our neighbors as ourselves, if we seek achievement and don't just benefit us alone and our families, but that benefits all of us. If we care for each other as we hope they would care for us and act accordingly, then unity of purpose is within our reach. I look back at my journey book and I see the pages are turned down, some retracted, tear stained, curled up at the ends, and many others waiting to be filled. I have my seat on the roots of that old oak tree, and I can turn back the pages and read the same thing that's on this side of the mountain is on the other side of the mountain. Now you have a journey, just as I do. And recorded in the pages of your heart is the dream of unity. And we take our wisdom of hope from these mountains to our shores, to the four corners of our nation, to the world, that the peace, justice, and freedom for all is bound together with our dream of unity.
This is hymn number 149, Lift Every Voice and Sing.
At last, we have seen since January 20th the will of the people. The voices of the voters has prevailed. And we are beginning to turn around in the direction of healing and finding common ground. It will not be an easy road, but we have walked it before. And in the spirit of unity, we can travel it again.
I am very grateful to Andy Reid for his assistance in organizing today's service. Also, sincere thanks to Annelinde Metzner for providing the beautiful music.